Imagine waking up in the year 1348. You stumble out of bed, half asleep, and instinctively do what we all do first thing in the morning. You look for the bathroom, but there is no bathroom, no toilet, no sink, no running water, no shower, and when you reach for toilet paper, your hand grabs nothing but air. So what do? This was everyday life for millions of people living in the Middle Ages. Today, we're diving into the uncomfortable but fascinating truth about medieval hygiene. Without showers, without plumbing, and without toilet paper, how did medieval people actually stay clean? And how did they handle going to the bathroom? Before we get into the truly wild stuff, we need to clear up a big myth. When most people imagine medieval life, they picture filthy peasants covered in mud, with rotten teeth and tangled hair. But medieval people didn't enjoy being dirty. Their hygiene was different because their world was different. Today, you turn a handle and clean water pours out instantly. In 1348, water meant work. You had to walk to a well or a river, haul heavy buckets back home, and hope nothing had died upstream. Clean water was precious. Wasting it on daily showers simply wasn't practical. Bathing wasn't a routine, it was a major operation. That said, medieval people absolutely did bathe. The idea that they never washed is false. In fact, public bathhouses were common in many towns and cities. These weren't just places to get clean, they were social spaces. People ate, drank, played games, and even conducted business while soaking in large wooden tubs of hot water. Men and women often bathed together. It was noisy, social, and surprisingly normal. Then came the year 1348. The Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions. And people began noticing something alarming. Bathhouses seemed to be places where sickness spread quickly. They didn't understand bacteria, but they understood that crowds meant danger. As fear grew, bathhouses were shut down. Doctors at the time even warned people against bathing. They believed hot water opened the pores and allowed bad air to enter the body, letting disease inside. Ironically, in trying to stay healthy during the plague, people stopped bathing altogether. So if they weren't bathing regularly, how did they keep themselves clean? They adapted. Most people practiced what we would now call dry hygiene. The secret weapon was linen. Linen undergarments were worn directly against the skin and were changed and washed frequently. The idea was simple. The linen absorbed sweat and dirt, protecting the expensive outer clothes. Wool outer garments were rarely washed because washing them improperly could ruin them. Instead, people focused on keeping their underclothes clean. Linen shirts and underpants were washed, dried, and reused. Daily washing still mattered too. Hands and faces were washed every day, especially before and after meals. Clean hands were considered polite and a sign of good manners. People used basins of water, sometimes scented with herbs, and scrubbed thoroughly. They also had soap, just not the kind you'd recognize. Medieval soap was a rough mixture of animal fat and wood ash. It was harsh, sometimes unpleasant, but it worked. Now let's talk about the question everyone is thinking about: toilet paper. How did medieval people wipe? The answer depends on who you were and where you lived. If you were wealthy and lived in a castle, you might have had access to something called a garderobe. This was a small room built into the castle wall with a stone seat and a hole. Waste fell down a long shaft into a pit or directly into the moat. As for wiping, even the rich didn't have soft paper. They used scraps of wool, linen, or old rags. These were reused, washed, and used again. Someone had to clean them, and that job was as unpleasant as it sounds. For ordinary people, things were far more creative. In the countryside, people used whatever nature provided. Soft hay or straw was common. Moss was a favorite because it was surprisingly absorbent. Large leaves worked too, but you had to be careful. Some plants could make a bad situation much worse. In coastal areas, people sometimes used shells or old fishing nets, which sounds less like hygiene and more like punishment. But perhaps the most infamous method came from the ancient world and survived for centuries: a sponge on a stick. You'd dip it in salt water, use it, then rinse it. Here's the horrifying part. In public toilets, this sponge was often shared. Yes, communal. One sponge, many people. It makes modern public restrooms feel luxurious by comparison. And wiping was only part of the problem. Where did people actually go? In castles, there were guardrobes. In monasteries, toilets were built over running water. But in crowded medieval cities, there was no plumbing. Most people used chamber pots, ceramic containers kept under the bed. When full, the polite option was to dump them into a river. The more common option, especially at night, was to open the window and throw the contents straight into the street. This is why medieval streets were often raised in the middle, allowing waste to run into ditches on either side. It's also why people wore wooden platforms strapped to their shoes, lifting them above the filth. Walking through a medieval city after dark was dangerous in ways we don't usually think about. And it wasn't just human waste. Animals lived alongside people. Chickens, pigs, and even cows often lived on the ground floor of homes, with families sleeping above them. Streets were filled with animal droppings, rotting food, and garbage. Rats thrived. Flies were everywhere. The smell of a medieval city must have been overwhelming. A thick mix of smoke, rot, sweat, and waste. People who lived there barely noticed, but travelers often smelled the city long before they saw it. So how did people cope? They turned to scent. Perfume wasn't just a luxury, it was protection. Wealthy people carried pomanders, small metal balls filled with herbs and spices, held to the nose when the smell became unbearable. Homes burned incense. People believed good smells could fight bad air and prevent disease controversies. It wasn't science, but it was their best defense. Laundry still happened too, just not often. Washing clothes was an all-day, physically exhausting task. Linen was taken to rivers, beaten with wooden bats, scrubbed with soap, rinsed, and laid out to dry. Most people owned only one or two sets of underclothes, rotating them carefully. Now return to 1348. The Black Death is everywhere. Fleas on rats spread the disease rapidly through filthy streets and overcrowded homes. People died within days, with no understanding of germs, no sanitation, and no real medical solutions. They were helpless. They prayed, they carried flowers, they masked smells, but they couldn't stop the rats. So the next time you're annoyed that your favorite toilet paper brand is out of stock, take a moment. Think about a medieval peasant in the dark, reaching for moss. Think about the shared sponge on a stick. Think about streets where waste fell from the sky. We live in a golden age of hygiene. Clean water, toilets, showers, and soap are everyday miracles. Medieval life was hard, dangerous, and incredibly smelly. And honestly, that's one part of history we should be very happy to leave behind.